Hello, hello. It is true, I am Mr. Katy Tur. And if anyone didn't get the joke, that is a reference to the fact that we are husband and wife, in addition to being colleagues in the world of journalism. Thank you.
I wanted a softball interview.
And it is of recent vintage, only 3 weeks old. And I will hope to avoid, which means there are no marital issues to work out here on stage yet. It's too new for that. I was hoping to get a sense from the audience of how many people here already have read the book and how many have not. How many have read the book? So we have a lot of curious, maybe on the fence buyers. So I think that's helpful because we can start with things that go to the beginning of this story, because the Donald Trump trajectory and the Katy Tur trajectory are entwined in a very fascinating way. And in the very same way that he is a political neophyte who made unexpected progress in his primary campaign and became president, Katy here was not a political reporter when all this began. So could you tell the nice people what it was that you were doing?
I reserve judgment on whether they're nice until after they buy the book. Buy the book. So I was a foreign correspondent for NBC News. I was living in London, and I just came back to New York for a couple days to remind my bosses that I exist, because they have a tendency to forget you when you're overseas unless there's some major news happening, and it happened to be a slow period. And I showed up in the newsroom, and I'm standing around just chatting with one of my colleagues, and Donald Trump was making headlines. He had just announced that he was running for president, and in doing so said Mexico was sending rapists into the country. So Macy's dropped the Donald Trump brand from its stores. Univision said, we're not going to air your pageant any longer. NBC said, we're not going to air your pageant any longer either. And this was a ballooning story that needed to be covered, and they needed someone to cover it. But they're not going to put one of their political reporters on it, because why would you put a political reporter on Donald Trump? I mean, he's a sideshow. He's going to be done in a few days. Yeah. So they said, who's around to do this? And someone yelled out, Katy, she's just standing around, which I was. And I ended up covering one story, then two, then three. And by the third or fourth day, I got told that the president of NBC News wanted to assign me the campaign full time. And I freaked out. I thought a myriad of things. One, I was living overseas and I was not living in New York. Two, I have a vacation in Sicily in a week and a French boyfriend who I'm supposed to go on it with. I'm sorry, Tony. And oh my God, they don't take me seriously if they're going to put me on the Donald Trump campaign. They must think I'm a joke as well. But I called a friend of mine who had covered Mitt Romney in 2012, and he had been urging me to do a political campaign at least once, because he said it was unlike anything else you will do. It's grueling, but it's fascinating. I called him, and he urged me to do it after he stopped laughing because it was Donald Trump. And so I said yes, and I was assured by my boss, one of my bosses, that it'll be 6 weeks tops. And then he said, and if he goes to the White House, you'll be White House correspondent. He starts laughing, steps into an elevator door, and the elevator door is shut.
The important thing to
take... It was cinematic in its moment.
And you know it's not an important assignment when the conversation takes place in a hallway as elevator doors shut.
Yeah, this wasn't a come to my office assignment.
In the beginning, Trump was having gatherings that would later become the spectacular packed rallies that cable networks would carry in their entirety, but they were much, much smaller. And you were actually at, I think, the very first one, or one of the very first ones in New Hampshire. Could you talk a little bit about that, and in contrast to what most of us have seen later, and also the interesting way in which Trump and you seem to be in a dynamic from the very beginning?
So the first rally that I went to was one of the first Donald Trump rallies, and this was around a backyard pool at a private home in New Hampshire. There was about a couple hundred people. Remember, at this time, nobody was taking his candidacy seriously. They thought that he was just trying to get some attention, and it was confusing because brands or companies were dropping him. Why was he trying to get all this negative attention? So the assumption was he wouldn't last to the debates, and even if he did, he would get laughed off stage, and he probably wouldn't want to release his financials since he's so notoriously secretive about his money. So at this backyard pool, where there were only a couple hundred people, it mostly was just people wondering what in the world Donald Trump was doing. I mean, he was on stage rambling. He had no coherent thread for why he was campaigning, except for, I want to build a wall, and I believe that Mexico is sending rapists. And the media didn't caveat me with some are good people. And I get more standing ovations than anybody. And Katy Tur, you're not paying attention.
In the middle of all of it.
In the middle of all this, and I remember thinking, I presumed he wasn't even talking to me because I'd never met him, I'd never shared the same air as him. There was no reason in my mind for Donald Trump to know who I was, and my producer gave me a hard nudge because the entire place is looking at me as is Donald Trump, and I just yelled out, I'm tweeting what you're saying, which I was doing, and which he approved of because he said I was doing a good job, and then he moved on. But that became the dynamic between the two of us, and that was the very first day, him calling me out while he was on stage, either for work that he approved of or more often than not work that he disapproved of.
Why do you think he took a particular interest in you from the beginning?
I think I'll let you all have your assumption, but then I'll add this. Donald Trump wants to be taken seriously, and I was the very first network correspondent assigned to cover his campaign full-time. And that is an honor when you're a presidential candidate. That means that a TV news network, a broadcast network, something with the legacy of NBC News, has decided to assign a reporter full-time to you. So that means they're taking you seriously. So he must have seen me as somebody very early on that he wanted to charm into submission, somebody that he could rely on for favorable coverage. Also remember, we're NBC News, and he has a long-standing relationship with NBC because we aired The Apprentice. And then there were large swaths of time before any other correspondents were assigned to cover him full-time. So I would go to cities across this country where I would be the only recognizable face in a room for Donald Trump. Other reporters that would come up to him for interviews were mostly local reporters, and he didn't know who they were. So we ended up engaging one-on-one quite a bit, and he came to pay much more attention to my reporting than he probably would have had I started the campaign in December or January when there were more correspondence.
So in the beginning, you stayed in the U.S. and you gave up an Italian vacation, a French boyfriend, a beautiful apartment in London, a job as a foreign correspondent, which holds a great deal of cachet, is exciting, involves a lot of airline miles, to follow Donald Trump, a person at that time virtually everybody in the political world considered to be a joke. Why would you give up so much to cover what appeared to be so little?
I'm still struggling to figure that out, and you know, Tony, because
I wasn't in the picture at that point either.
Every few weeks I look at you and I say, we really need to move back to London.
It's true.
I love that job. It was the dream job for me, a foreign correspondent, the pinnacle of my career. I mean, being a foreign correspondent for a legacy news network is an extremely coveted job. I mean, you get to travel the world, you get to meet people you would never get to meet, and you get to do it while somebody else pays for it. I mean, it's perfect.
But did you see something in the beginnings of Trump that made you think this is going to be worth it? Or this is going to be important? Initially,
it was a 6-week assignment, so I figured there was nothing to lose. And as it continued, he became, I guess, more captivating, fascinating. I mean, this was a roller coaster, and I wasn't about to, get off the ride. Nobody understood what he was trying to achieve or why so many people were so excited by him, and people are still trying to figure that out to this day. And I got to see it and try to understand it myself. And I wasn't going to say no to that. And also, being overseas, again, when it gets slow, you can tend to be forgotten. And there's a line in the book where, while I was very happy overseas, it's a quote, from another person saying, "Why be happy when you can be great?" And that's kind of what I was thinking in that moment. I have an opportunity to do something great, to make a mark, to see history unfold before my eyes. It's a cliche, but that's really what a lot of us get into the business to do, to watch history in the making. And Donald Trump, love him or hate him, was history in the making. He was upending every norm. He was defying political gravity. He was pissing people off, and he was exciting so many others.
But everybody thought that he was going to plummet after a certain point, after Iowa, after the fall. There were all these lines in the sand that the political prognosticators would say, after that point, it's a cliff for him. You, and I can attest to this because I worked for NBC and MSNBC while she was covering Trump, and we
met in the makeup room.
We met in the makeup room. You were a lone voice of skepticism against the political opinion that he was going to burn out and crash. Why were you so confident as a political neophyte on those calls, those morning editorial calls, to say, something is happening here?
I wasn't confident. I mean, I started out with a bit of a pipsqueak voice.
What were you seeing? What were you seeing that made you think?
There was enthusiasm and there was devotion in a way that the other political candidates were not receiving. I mean, he went after John McCain. I mean, can you remember a time where an American politician, anybody, frankly, in the public eye, where they went after a veteran or a prisoner of war, an American war hero, and were able to not only get away with it, but to see their popularity rise? That is unheard of in American politics. You don't go after a veteran. You just do not do it, especially within the Republican Party. You don't do it. And Donald Trump did, and he got disinvited from a bunch of Republican events, but his poll numbers went up, and a few weeks later, when he went to Mobile, Alabama, 20,000 people showed up for him in Mobile, Alabama. He said it was 40,000. He was lying. It was 20,000.
The pointless lie.
He always lies about the numbers. If it could be 100,000 people, and he'll be like, there were 190,000 people there. He has to almost double it. But it goes to show you that there was something about Donald Trump that made whatever he said, even if it was terribly offensive, it didn't matter. People liked it. And I would get on the calls, and people who have been doing politics forever, who are well respected, who I respect very much to this day, and who've seen it all happen before, who know how things go, said, this is silly season. I mean, it's the summer, people aren't paying attention. By the time the fall rolls around, football will be back on TV. They won't want to watch a Donald Trump rally. Homeland will be on TV. They won't want to watch a Donald Trump rally. It's Christmas. No, people are going to they're going to be with their families. By January, they're going to get serious about politics. Donald Trump could never win. But these crowds that would show up to his events were still huge, and they were still so excited to see him.
So let's talk about that. Anybody in the room been to a Donald Trump rally? We got one person in the back, 2, 3. I would say fewer than 2% of the audience has been to a rally. So for the sake of the 98% of the people who've only seen it on TV, what is it like to be in the middle of a Donald Trump rally, and really the middle, caged in with the other journalists?
Well, first off, a lot of the time when you're watching a rally on television, something he'll say will sound very offensive, and you'll presume that the room is not with him. Oh, this is where he crossed the line. Maybe the cameras aren't picking up the audio in the room, or they're just focused on him, and you can't tell what's happening and how people are responding. And there were multiple instances of this where he would say something like, there was a crying baby, and I'm like, get the baby out of here. And he was clearly joking, but on TV it didn't really ring that way. Or if somebody tweeted something, it's not how it read. But he never lost any room that he was in, except for one time. He never lost any room that he was in, even when he was saying truly wild stuff. He was calling Ben Carson a serial liar and making some sort of comparison to a child molester in the process, and making fun of him for the belt and the stabbing. And it was unbelievable in the moment, even to the reporters. We were like, what in God's name? I caught myself. What in God's name is Donald Trump doing? I mean, can he get away with this? I remember calling the Today Show, and it was late at night, and saying, you've got to cover this in the morning. This is crazy. He did this and that and this, and people don't care. And they don't care, they like it. And these were Ben Carson supporters too. They were people who were saying, I'm deciding between Donald Trump and Ben Carson. And people who were like the evangelicals in Iowa who really looked up to Ben Carson because he's a leader in the evangelical community. And Donald Trump was just eviscerating him and calling him names and calling him a liar. And we talked to them afterwards, and they were like, well, he's got a point. And so, he just defied all of the odds. So my point is, these rooms were always with him. And it wasn't just the Trump rallies. It was people that I would meet in diners, in gas stations, in airports, cab drivers. Cab drivers became my bellwether for how well Donald Trump was doing. And I could tell you cab drivers in New York City, cab drivers in Washington, D.C., cab drivers in Miami, cab drivers in... all the states. I'm blanking on the specific one. St. Louis. They generally, in North Carolina, 9 times out of 10, were Donald Trump supporters. So all walks of life, too.
For those who don't know, Katy's book is a memoir. It is not an effort to tell a complete story of the inside workings of the Trump campaign or of the whole election. It is her perspective on all of it and what it was like to be her for 510 days on the Trump campaign. And because it is a memoir, I'd like to hear you talk a bit about how you thought about covering Donald Trump and how you dealt with the criticism his camp put on you and your colleagues, and whether any of the criticism of the media that the Trump campaign currently pursues and still pursues is fair.
I think you watch my TV show too much, because you just asked me 7 questions in one.
Well, no, because
you committed the
I reject the criticism. We're now a cable news show here. We're going to debate.
Just ask the first question. Ask the first question.
Well,
how did I?
Do you think you covered Donald Trump fairly and accurately, and how did you think about that coverage?
I think I covered Donald Trump fairly and accurately. I think I was tough on Donald Trump day in and day out, and which is part of the reason why he kept calling me out on stage. I think he deserved tough coverage. I think anybody who runs for president deserves about as tough of coverage as you can give them, because they are running to lead this country. And you want to be as thorough as you possibly can be, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side. Independent side, doesn't matter. That person needs to be fully vetted by the press, even if it makes you uncomfortable because it's your chosen candidate. So I think I did it fairly. And it was difficult because he would say things that were demonstrably untrue over and over and over again. And then there were times where he did get treated unfairly in a certain rally or from a certain perception, and we would have to go on TV and say, no, he really was joking, and let me tell you what was happening in the room, because it wasn't read well didn't read correctly on TV or online. But but criticism of the media in general for the way that we cover Donald Trump. I do think that we need to look back at 2016 to figure out how to do 2020 and how to make sure we do it as well as we possibly can. I do think that involves not just coverage of the candidates and not just a good rinsing of their opinions, a good wash and rinse of their opinions and their policies and their behavior, but also covering the voters a little bit more. I think we could have done a better job talking to people every day, and not just talking to people, putting them on television every single day, and talking about the issues that they cared about in their communities, because all politics are local, and each community was voting based on what they wanted to change in their community. And that's why so many unlikely voters for Donald Trump came out on November 8th, in places where you expected a Democrat to win, places where Obama won twice. People who voted for President Obama twice ended up voting for Donald Trump because of economic issues. And they decided willfully to ignore all of the outrageous things he said and did because they were looking for the hope and change that they were promised the previous 8 years. They didn't see it happening in their communities. They didn't see their quality of life improve. And there was a feeling like Donald Trump might, despite all of his many issues, might be the person who can go in and shake the system up. There was a gamble that was done for a lot of people, and we need to, in 2020, ask those people if they think that their gamble paid off.
I covered Trump rallies on the outside, covering the voters who were going in, and there was a time when the outside of the rallies were so violent that riot police were routinely a part of the control, where fights would break out, where ugly, ugly things were yelled. And then on the inside, it sometimes seemed it was even worse. How safe did you feel in the middle of those crowds when Donald Trump himself was pointing and hissing in your direction by name?
You compartmentalize. You covered one rally, I think, on the inside while I was hiding in Miami for a day.
Oh, there.
You compartmentalize. You tried not to let it get to you, and people would come up to the pen and scream obscenities at us day in and day out. They would call us names, call us liars, say that we should be harmed physically, spit on us. I mean, any sort of behavior you can imagine that happened towards the press. And there were times where we were all more guarded towards the end of the campaign than we would be, a little more on edge than we would be, because you just can't help it. But there were times where people really felt like their safety was on the line. There was a rally in New Orleans where protesters stopped the rally, and the crowd got really ugly, and someone was tripped or they were pushed or something, but it seemed like the whole crowd was about to tumble into the press pen, which is just this bicycle rack gated off area in the middle of the rally. So that was one moment. There was one moment there were a number of moments, but the one that comes to mind and I write about in the book was the Muslim Ban Day from December 12th, 2015. This was in South Carolina, Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, and we're in the belly of a World War II battleship. To give you an idea of what was happening at that time, a few weeks earlier, San Bernardino had happened, the terrorist attack in San Bernardino, and in response to it, President Obama gave a speech on terrorism to the country. And the following Monday, Donald Trump is not dominating the headlines because we're talking about President Obama and terrorism. And he comes out midday without any sort of warning, without any sort of heads up, and makes an announcement through a press release that says he wants to ban all Muslims from coming into the country. And we had interviewed people that were waiting to get into this rally to find out if they felt it was a good or bad idea. People presumed that this was just a bridge too far, that this was going to sink him. He couldn't possibly try to ban an entire religion of people from coming into the country. It's anti-American.
I don't want to interrupt the story, but I do want to have you mention where you were and what it's like when major news on the presidential level happens and your day goes to goes sideways?
Well, we're in South Carolina, so you can imagine I'm enjoying a really good lunch. One of the, there were few and far between. So we were just coming back from lunch at a great place in South Carolina, stuffing ourselves with delicious fried food. And we went back to the hotel, Ali Vitali, my Donald Trump embed, for NBC News. And if you get the book, you'll understand what that means. And we ran into another one of our colleagues who was on his computer, and the email from the campaign popped up on his computer 30 seconds before it came to our phones, and his face just turns white and his jaw drops. It's cartoonish, and he starts laughing in that uncomfortable way you laugh when you just can't believe something's in front of your eyes. And Ali and I looked at him and said, "What in the world are you looking at? Tell us. And he's like, look at your phones. And so we start furiously refreshing our email, and then this comes over. Donald J. Trump is announcing a ban on all Muslims. And no sooner did I have the phone in my hand and read it than my phone started ringing. It was MSNBC saying, "You got to go live."
She describes the phone as a shock collar in the book.
It kind of is. And if any of you were watching cable news for the campaign or MSNBC, you'll know that we were on TV constantly, every single hour on the hour. And this was one of those blessed days where I had a 3-hour break, so I actually could eat lunch. And my phone rings, and they said, you got to get on TV and walk us through this. And I'm like, I don't know anything about it. I mean, I just got it on my phone. I haven't had a chance to call the campaign. I got to call my sources. But that doesn't matter when you're in the world of 24/7 news coverage. They need you on TV immediately. They need you trying to explain even the unexplainable. And so I call in, and Kate Snow and I found this old tape. Kate Snow and I talk for 10, 15 minutes trying to figure out what this statement means and how it might affect Donald Trump's campaign, or how might voters respond to it, or how might the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or the political establishment respond to it. We're tap dancing. And just coincidentally, MSNBC had come out with a poll that day that showed that Republican voters, the thing that they feared the most, their biggest fear, was being the victim of a terrorist attack. So there was that, and how is that going to sway Donald Trump supporters' opinions? Where has Donald Trump been before this? Why would he be doing this at this particular moment? Blah, blah, blah. So we rush to the venue, do these interviews with supporters outside, and then go inside to wait for Donald Trump to arrive. And people are angry. They're scared. As I mentioned, San Bernardino had just happened. And Donald Trump had been saying and was saying with this announcement that the Obama administration wasn't vetting people. They weren't vetting people who were coming into the country, and that's why these terrorist attacks are happening. They're going to happen more often. Muslims are building bombs in their living room. Their Muslim neighbors aren't telling the authorities about it. They are hiding them. And the media is complicit because the media isn't reporting on it. They are not reporting on the failures of the Obama administration. So the room was scared, the room was angry, and we couldn't find anybody who thought that this was a bad idea. The most we got was, I've got to think about it. On the other end of the spectrum, it was, what would be even better would be if we deport all Muslims.
And at the time that Donald Trump is making this announcement, he's also conducting a Twitter feud with you and another reporter.
Yeah, he was upset about tweets that I sent out, literally tweets that I sent out a few days earlier at a rally in Raleigh. Say that 10 times fast, a rally in Raleigh. There are funny points in the book. It's not just serious political stuff. There's some funny moments. Where a bunch of protesters got organized, and they kept interrupting his speech over and over and over again at 5 to 10 minute intervals, enough to where he abruptly stopped talking and left the stage to shake hands with people. And I said this on Twitter, and he was furious about it. Hope Hicks sent an email saying, "Mr. Trump thought your tweets were disgraceful. Not nice. Best. Hope." And after she sent that email, he followed up by going online on his Twitter feed and tweeting out that I'm a liar and I'm dishonest and I should be fired in a series of, I think, 5 tweets, something like that, 5 tweets. And so my Twitter feed is full of people calling me a liar and saying I'm disgusting and making fun of me and my family and also death threats.
So when you're, and it jumps from the digital world to the real world in the belly of that battleship.
So we're in the belly of the battleship sorry, we're jumping around, hope you're following. As Donald Trump is getting on stage to make this announcement, this Muslim ban announcement, and it is, the atmosphere is tense. I mean, it's a tinderbox. You throw a match in and the whole place would light on fire. It is I don't want to say a scary room, but it's the kind of room where it's best to keep a low profile. So I'm like sitting on the platform where the cameras are. The cameras are all above. So I'm just kind of keeping my head down because he had called me out. I didn't want to be visible, or I didn't want to be as visible as I normally am standing in front of the camera. So Donald Trump takes the stage, and he starts with his poll numbers, as he always does, and before he gets to the Muslim ban, he starts talking about the media. And then he's saying what a lie it was, as if the room knew what he was talking about. What a lie it was from Katy Tur. She's back there, little Katy. And he's pointing. And I'm like sitting right here.
And the speech is live on every cable channel.
Yeah, because it's the Muslim ban day, and everyone's trying to figure out what was going on, so it's live. And the entire room, thousands of people turn at once and start booing at me, screaming, in person, saying the things that they were saying online, but saying them to my face. And it was nerve-wracking. My phone, again, starts going off like crazy, not just people on Twitter, but my colleagues and my bosses and my mom saying, what in the world is happening? Because she's watching it on television. Are you safe? Are you okay? I mean, she's concerned. But I turned my phone off. I put it down. I put it over here because I got a job to do. He's making a major announcement.
How do you keep doing that job when that kind of attention is
so here's
being
how
directed on you?
I've learned at this point, because he had gone after me so many times, I'd learned at this point that in order to diffuse the situation, you smile and you wave. So I did that. I smiled and I waved at this angry crowd, and eventually they got bored of screaming at me and they turned around.
How were you personally angry at Donald Trump himself for endangering you in that way?
In the moment you let it go, because you have a job to do, especially on that night. You let it go. You have a job to do. That's what I just kept doing. I'm not a part of the story. Let it go. I knew that would make me a part of the story. I was frustrated by it. I didn't want to be a part of the story. I did not want Chris Matthews to ask me about it on TV 2 seconds later, which he did.
Although it is true that she kept, the stories in the book are not stories that were told live on MSNBC. You saved all of them and put them in this volume. And before we go to questions from the audience, and speaking of doing your job, I love the fact that you were one of the first people in America to know about the Access Hollywood tape. The grab them by the P tape.
So much more interesting today, isn't it, than it was even a year ago?
It's a fascinating chapter in your story. And I love the journalistic process of having to get comment from the Trump campaign. So when you're a journalist, you find something out, and then you go to the person who is relevant to what you found out, and you say, what do you think about this? But it's a little different when it's the Access Hollywood tape.
Let's give a slightly more direct book plug. Yes, this book is about the campaign, which many of you all followed and saw. But what you get from it is a behind-the-scenes look, pull back the curtain to see what it's like to be a correspondent on the campaign trail, what your lives are like, what the campaign was like behind the scenes, how did they treat reporters, what are the things they said that may have been appropriate or not. And then in these weird history-making moments, what is it like to have to put something like that on television? And this was odd, because this is a tape that, with language that you can't put on TV, of a presidential candidate bragging, it seems, about being able to assault women. And they let you do it because you're a star. And so I see the tape, I exclaim loudly in the executive office where I'm being shown it, oh my God, did Donald Trump just say you can grab them by the, but I said the word in the moment, and my boss looks at me and she's like, yes, he did. We need the campaign to comment on it, and we're going to put it on TV right after you get that comment. So get a comment, write a script, and let's get it on television. And so I email Hope and Jason, and the email is Hope Hicks and Jason Miller, who are the communications team on the Trump campaign. And the email, word for word, is in the book. And it's something like, Mr. Trump said you can grab them by the, and he also talked about effing a married woman, and word for word the things he said. Do you have a comment? They did not respond. But then I have to figure out how to put all these rated R things into PG-13 format for daytime cable news TV. And so I think I said grab them by the P were sexual advances, which is totally not fair to sexual advances. Yeah, and I mean, it's fascinating looking back on it now because it seemed like if anything was going to break this campaign, this was going to break the campaign. The whole place went silent, dark. Kellyanne Conway canceled her TV appearances, which at the time was unheard of. But yeah, it's interesting to look back on it now, especially considering what's happening in the Me Too campaign and how the president's weighing in on Al Franken and talking about a tape, but completely ignoring the fact that he has his own. Anyway, questions?
Yeah. There are microphones in the center, and we can cease and desist with my questions and get to yours.
But we should keep them, since we don't have a lot of time, to questions, not statements.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
First question is, how would you rate the job that the gentleman who interviewed you had done? Was he tough enough?
I think it could have been a bit tougher, to be honest.
And the second question is, most of Donald Trump's policies adversely affect the people who voted for him. Do you think that those people will maybe by the next election come to the realization that they voted for someone that's doing them in?
I don't know. You're right. Some of the policies that he's spoken about or enacted, some of the deregulations or the rollback of regulations could potentially affect them in a negative way when it comes to just EPA standards. The gutting of Obamacare is going to affect a lot of people. This tax plan could potentially raise the taxes of the lower class and middle class down the line. That might not happen, though, until after the next election cycle for those rollbacks to cease. We don't have that full bill voted on yet, so it could change. I don't know. I mean, it depends on job creation. Do they have jobs? Is the job better than the job they had before? Do they want to continue giving him 4 more years for another chance to try and push things through? I don't know. Depends.
I wanted to thank you for being here. I admired your coverage, and hope you keep at it. And I wanted to ask, how in the world do you put up with these comments from the other side when you offer them to try to give a balance, and you know it's nonsense? And how can you do any better? How can the networks do any better in the future?
Well, I have to reject the premise. The other side is not. Right. Here's the thing about reporters and journalists, and it's a good reminder, we're not out to convince anybody how to vote. It's not our job to convince Trump voters not to vote for Trump again. It's not our job to convince Democrats to vote for Democrats. It's our job to give you all the information that is out there, to fact check where we need to fact check, to contextualize where we need to contextualize, to give you everything you need to make the decision that you want to make. So when people come on my show and they don't have the facts behind them, I try to push back regardless of whether or not they're a Democrat or a Republican. It's tough right now, though, because there's a lot of people feel like they have a lot of license to just say fake news when they decide they don't like something or there's a fact that they don't like. And that's really problematic because it allows people to just decide that anything they don't want to hear, they don't have to hear, and they don't have to believe. And that is going to, I think, negatively affect all of us in the future. So my plea to all of you, and thank you for asking this because I can give my plea, is to do your best to police your Facebook feeds, your Twitter feeds, whatever social media you use, and to be very critical when you look at certain articles, and make sure that you're getting accurate information and you aren't just reading the things that you want to hear, and that you do take a moment to hear the other side as well. Have conversations with people. Maybe they didn't vote the same way you did, but I think it's better to understand everyone and come to a place where we can talk again and accept a shared set of facts again, so we can make better decisions or good decisions in the future.
If you don't disagree with something in your news feed, you're doing it wrong. Watching the news should be an experience of dissonance, not consonance.
It shouldn't be comfortable. Thank you.
Sometimes I watch the daily press meetings with Sarah, and I'm wondering, I just want to get up and like strangle her. So I'd like to know how you guys don't get up and strangle her.
Well, first of all, we'd get arrested, and
That's a good reason.
one of the reasons. The White House, it's always been that podium has always been a place where a press secretary will try and spin the news in their favor. That's just the way things are done. This is, I think, taking it to a absurd degree. There are times where questions aren't answered, or they're just either she says I'll get back to you and she never gets back to you, or she just makes it about the Democrats suddenly, even though you're asking about Donald Trump or the Republicans, or she's denying things that he has said. So yeah, it's extraordinarily frustrating. I wonder how valuable those briefings are, personally.
Thank you. We're
You're
in the same
welcome.
boat then.
What?
We're in the same boat.
I think every time somebody spins, it's not great for anybody.
I believe the no spin zone is available as a slogan.
Hi. So I'm a journalist student, and I read your book when it first came out, and you mentioned that you never had a background in political journalism, that you started out as a weather girl, and that kind of helped you cover Donald Trump better because you didn't have that background in DC punditry. But how do you feel that whole, swamp sort of affected the coverage of Donald Trump, and why people didn't expect his victory?
I worked for the Weather Channel. I chased tornadoes. I was never actually allowed to do the weather because I don't understand the meteorology. I'm not a meteorologist. But I covered the news with the weather, and before that I was a local news reporter for a long time, and then obviously a foreign correspondent. I think that it was beneficial going to 2016 because I was able to see with fresh eyes the campaign and the support that he was getting and the enthusiasm he received without all the baggage of, oh, these are the way things have always been done and he can't possibly survive this because so-and-so didn't survive this. So I thought it was really beneficial. I think that is partially what happened during 2016, and some of my most revered colleagues who are political people who do live in DC have admitted as such, saying, part of the reason we didn't see Donald Trump coming is because we just believed everything, all of our hype, everything that we had seen come before in Washington, and how important it is to get out there and be on the road and not just rely on polls, actually talk to people and see something, smell something, feel something, be inside those rallies and get a sense of the momentum and the movement. So that's also part of the reason why I didn't go to DC myself. There was a few things. He was one of them. But one of the other ones was that I think it's better to talk about it from the outside and to try and maintain the fresh eyes I had in 2016.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And also, congratulations on your wedding.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marcia Reisman, and it's a pleasure to meet you. I've been watching you since you started, and it's really fun to see you in person. You've developed into a really wonderful news reporter.
Thank you very much.
Go back to Sunday, November 6th.
Okay.
That morning on all the news stations, everyone was reporting that it was Hillary's to lose. Hillary, that's interesting. It was Hillary's to lose, and the percentages of her winning were across the board 60, 70, 80, all the way up to one ABC reporter who said 98%. What
That's why you should watch NBC.
What happened?
What happened? I mean, I think she wrote a book called What Happened.
It doesn't tell enough.
The polls were wrong. They weren't totally wrong. They just were wrong enough to lose, or not lose the election, but miscalled the election. I believe it was November 6th. It might have been the day before that James Comey came out and said the investigation, the second investigation into her emails was done.
That's true, yeah.
I was talking to a senior Clinton aide who said that they felt that that was the worst thing that could have happened because it brought the emails, not the reopening, which they didn't like either, but then the closing, because instead of bringing closure to that, it brought it back up again, and it made people remember it. And if there was, remember, if the Access Hollywood tape was really bad for Trump, really bad for Trump. And the only thing that kind of got him out of that hole after 50 former and current Republican lawmakers were saying either drop out or I won't vote for you was the reopening of the emails. And what that did, and I'm not saying that was the nail in the coffin for Clinton, but what that did was it enabled moderate Republicans or Republicans who were on the fence or Republicans who did not want to vote for Donald Trump to say, I'm going to vote for him because I can't vote for somebody who might be under federal investigation. Which is ironic. But we didn't know at the time that Donald Trump was under investigation because the FBI didn't inform anybody. And there's questions about what's the double standard for there. So the polls were wrong just enough, and I think that there's a bunch of failings. The Clinton campaign didn't go to Michigan when they probably should have gone to Michigan. They didn't make sure that their blue wall was going to stand. The Comey investigation didn't help. What was going on with Russia, we still don't know. I think we're still a bit away from figuring out exactly what happened on November 8th and why Donald Trump ultimately won. But you can't discount the enthusiasm that he had. I mean, people just loved him.
Yeah.
The ones that did.
Unbelievable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. I'm so sorry because this conversation is absolutely very engaging and inspiring.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you
all for
to
coming.
Katy Tur.
Thank you, Katie, for doing this.
Thank you, Tony. Please buy the book. Please buy the book.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much.